episode 61 of the Soul in Wonder podcast, a podcast designed to inspire you to discover, unlock, and unleash your true self. And today we're really excited because we have special guest Dean Sluyter on the show today. Dean Sluyter has taught meditation and led workshops and retreats since 1970, from Ivy League colleges to even maximum security prisons. I bet he has some interesting stories to tell there. And he's been a grateful student of sages in several traditions and has completed numerous retreats and pilgrimages in India, Tibet, Nepal, and the West. Dean's books include Natural Meditation, winner of the Nautilus Award for Best Book on Body, Mind, and Spirit Practices, as well as his new book, Fear Less, Living Beyond Fear, Anxiety, Anger, and Addiction. And he has appeared frequently in national media, including the New York Times, National Public Radio, Coast to Coast AM, and the Oprah Magazine. And of course, when not writing or teaching, Dean makes music and happily rides his Vespa through the streets of Santa Monica. So before we started officially recording, Dean was telling us an interesting story about his time in, was it Pennsylvania or
New
New
Hope,
Jersey?
Pennsylvania. Doing what I do, writing books and presenting them across the country and giving workshops all over the map, you have some interesting adventures on the road. Last night was one of my more interesting ones. I was giving a presentation of the book Fear Less in Farley's Bookshop in New Hope, PA. And I was about 10 minutes into my presentation when the clerk came in with a worried look on her face and told us they had just gotten an alert that there was an active shooter situation in the building across the street from us. And we said, well, what do you advise we do? And she said, well, I don't know. What do you think you should do? So we decided that, one friend of mine who was in the audience, who's an artist, a local artist, raised his hand and said, well, my studio gallery is just a few blocks from here. We can go there and continue the event there. So we did that. On the way out, everyone lined up at the cash register, bought copies of my book, everyone noting that the topic, Fear Less, was very appropriate at the moment. And we got to my friend's gallery and continued there, had a lovely discussion and meditation. As it happens, my friend's specialty is painting pictures of naked men who are, let's say, very generously endowed. So this was a first. It was pretty special.
Oh, goodness.
Well, there's a first for everything, and what an experience that is.
Oh, but the good news is that when I got home, I checked about the situation online, and it turned out it was a prank. There was no shooter, there was no bomb, no anything.
Well, that's definitely good news, because, right now, today, we're dealing with a lot of crazy things happening. So
glad you guys were safe and made it out of there with some comedy relief too. So, Dean, how did you get into the work of mindfulness and natural meditation anyway?
It started for me very early, actually. It started with some childhood experiences that I had. A point that I make all the time in my teaching is that waking up is the most natural thing in the world. It doesn't take artificial means. It's not weird. It's not exotic. What's not natural, what's weird, is not being awake, is not knowing what you are, is thinking I'm just this, carbon-based chunk of matter with some little pilot somewhere up at the top behind the eyeballs looking out, not experiencing that what you are is so much more expansive and so much more just boundlessly okay than that. Mm-hmm. One of the probably the most interesting of my childhood experiences happened when I was 11 years old, and my family was getting ready to go out to a drive-in movie, which is something you might have heard of, you young folks.
I've been to a few.
And I had two brothers, and my mom sent me out to the garage to clear out all of our toys and comic books and things from the back seat of the car because we were going to be going to this movie. Now, I was just 11, 12 years old, But even at that age, my mind tended to just go round and round a lot, chasing its tail. What about this? What about that? As my mind is going around like this, like a squirrel on the wheel, and I'm picking up the comic books and the toys, and the next thing that I pick up is a Mad magazine. And on the cover, as always, is a picture of Mad's idiot mascot, Alfred E. Newman, with his gap teeth and his, crazy ears and his funny grin. And of course, underneath his motto, which is, "What? Me worry?" And suddenly, like a bolt out of the blue, I saw what my mind was doing. And I saw that this is a thing called worrying. I'd been too caught up in it to realize that I was caught up in it. And suddenly I was outside of it, seeing that I had been choosing to push that lever, and that therefore I could stop pushing that lever. And all of a sudden, my mind went silent. Just all that chatter stopped. And really, it was as if the top of my head opened to the sky. I mean, I went into absolute, solid, cut it with a knife, eat it with a spoon, blissful nirvana. I mean, all those words, of course, I read in books much later. And I just was floating in that nirvanic state all through the rest of the evening.
Wow, that's so powerful, and I wish more people can experience that blissful state. I think a lot of us get caught up in the head. I mean, I can speak for myself; it happens a lot, and I have to check myself. And I think what you mentioned is just becoming the observer and
making the conscious choice. Like once you realize that, oh, hey, I'm doing this, that means I have the power to stop doing this. Like that's brilliant.
Right.
I don't want to say it's brilliant for an 11-year-old, because I think children are naturally more, like you said, it's our natural state.
Yes.
But we have to unlearn the things that we learn through just being in society. And so for you to unlearn that right then and there at 11 years old, to return back to your natural state is really beautiful.
Yeah, and I think that gave me a kind of, it's like, it gave me the taste of it. It's like when you go into the ice cream store and they have those little sample spoons. So I got a little sample of the rocky road and went, I want more of this. So not too many years afterward, when I was in high school, I started finding the books. The books were harder to find in those days than they are now. Now you go on Amazon and, there's a million spiritual books and meditation books and mindfulness books, sagging on the digital bookshelves. But in those days, they were harder to find. I found a little slim copy of the Upanishads and of the Bhagavad Gita translated by Swami Prabhavananda. Soon I started reading the Tao Te Ching, and I went, oh, okay, these things that I've had these little tastes of, other people have experienced this. And there are these traditions thousands of years old where people have explored those experiences and road tested methods so that it doesn't just happen once in a while arbitrarily coming out of the sky, but so that you can keep accessing that in a systematic way. And after a while, you start living there, start moving in your furniture. It's like a new girlfriend or boyfriend. First you move in your toothbrush and extra pair of socks, and then you move in your furniture.
That's a perfect way
of
describing it.
I love that. And it's nice to have that sort of validation, I guess, especially after having such a profound experience as you did, having that validation from other texts and other spiritual leaders talking about this sort of thing. And so
it's nice to find out that you're not insane.
That is very true. That is true. We thought we were going off the deep end many times, but undoubtedly this has really impacted your life, considering you've written about it in many books besides just this one. So in what ways has walking this path of mindfulness and this natural meditation you teach, how has this impacted you? In what ways are you different? Have you changed? Have you grown from this?
It's a great question, because when you read the books, the descriptions in the classic text of what happens They're perfectly accurate, of course, but they tend to be in language that sounds abstract or philosophical to us. In in reality, boots on the ground reality, um, when I first started really practicing meditation in a systematic way, every morning and every evening, and then I started going to short retreats, weekend retreats. And after I came home from about the fourth or fifth retreat, my girlfriend at the time said to me, you know, every time you come back from one of these retreats, you're a little bit nicer. And that's it. That's really, in a sense, it's that simple that you stop grinding your gears inside. It more and more just the way things feel inside is friction free. It's open. It's spacious. It's sky-like, and that sky-like spacious feeling inside naturally projects or radiates outside in your dealings with others. Not that you're trying to do that, because in fact, when my girlfriend said to me, "You're getting a little nicer each time," my response was, "I am? Oh, okay." Because the real thing sneaks up on you, kind of like sneaks up behind your ears in a natural way. It's organic. It's like a little kid growing. You don't necessarily see them growing from day to day, but one day you put their old shirt on them, and the sleeve is up here, and that happens. You're going through your life, and maybe one day you'll have a very challenging day. Stuff comes up. You have to deal with these difficult people or that difficult situation at work or family or whatever. Maybe you have to put out 5 different fires. And at the end of the day, you're sitting on your bed, you're taking your socks off, and you realize, I kind of feel like nothing happened today. Like I didn't do anything. Everything was just. Yes. So it becomes more and more like that. And the fulfilling thing about teaching, doing what I do and traveling around and teaching in colleges and corporate settings and prisons, is that you see the procedure is repeatable. Mm. Doing the same simple stuff keeps, and I never cease being amazed. I just gave a session in New Jersey here the Sunday morning, yesterday. And there's some people, so I used to live in New Jersey, now I live in California. So I come back to this area in North Jersey, usually a few times a year. So some of these people, I've been seeing them for 10, 15 years, and just seeing, the glow in their eye getting clearer, and hearing the stories of how much just more easy and simple and straightforward and enjoyable their lives are becoming. I go, oh, turns out that all the stuff I've been saying all these years was not just a bunch of BS. That's nice.
And it's beautiful that you commented on that subtle growth where you may not notice those shifts on a day-to-day basis, but then suddenly one day you're like, I reacted differently to this situation than I might have a few weeks ago. Or I feel like I've shifted into a new state of being, but maybe I can't put my finger on it. And then over time, I believe you're able to articulate that growing process, much like you have with sharing your story and how you've shifted. And, you also touched up on the philosophical teaching, or it appears or sounds philosophical. These teachings that are actually very natural and uncut and real. And you mentioned, taking a more boots on the ground approach, which I find your book, Fear Less, takes that approach. You take something that might sound like it could be debatable, or it could be, like a matter of belief, and bring it down to earth.
Digestible content.
And so what inspired you to write your new book, Fear Less? And if you could explain the premise a little, that would be wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Sure. First of all, thank you for pronouncing the title correctly, because people sometimes say fearless, and I'm not fearless. I haven't met anyone who's fearless. Fortunately, you don't have to be fearless. In fact, some fear is good. Some fear is healthy. It's healthy to have some innate fear of snakes. Mother Nature programs us with that because some of those snakes are dangerous. But now, if you're like this friend of mine who can't walk into a pet shop because she's afraid the snakes are going to break through their glass tanks and jump in her face, then that fear quotient has been cranked up to 11. That's unnatural. So fearing less, just getting things back to a healthy balance is what this is about. But the subtitle, Living Beyond Fear, Anxiety, Anger, and Addiction. And we could have kept going. We could have kept, grief, jealousy, on and on. We ran out of room on the cover. Because really all of those, what in some teachings they call the afflictive emotions. In Buddhist teaching, they call them the afflictive emotions. They all seem very different, but they all really ultimately have the same root, which is the failure to recognize what we truly are. We all think that we are, to use a metaphor, that we're each a little wave on the surface of the ocean. And, my little wave is shaped like this, and your little wave is shaped like that. And our waves are always sloshing into each other. Look out, that wave, backed into mine and took my parking space. And also we start to notice that sooner or later, every wave breaks against the shore and disappears. This little inconvenience called death. And that doesn't look like fun. And so many waves seem like they're bigger than my wave. They're having a better time. So if that's your model of life, it's not surprising that you get afraid, you get anxious, you get angry, you try to then get rid of all those things by self-medicating with addictive substances or addictive behaviors. It makes perfect sense. If in fact that were a valid model of life, that we were really just little chunks of organic matter with little electrical signals up here giving us a little bit of consciousness, and then you do that for 70, 80 years and game over, then it would make perfect sense to just live in constant anxiety, which I think most people actually do, but they just suppress it. They push it into a corner. So the solution to all of this, I'm giving the high level stuff first. We'll go back to the more simple boots on the ground in a minute. But so kind of on the highest level, the one solution to all those, what seemingly different afflictions, is to realize what we truly are, which is, hey, little wave, look down into your base. There's this thing down here called ocean. And it's not limited. It's not some tiny little shape. It doesn't break against the shore and die. It's vast. It's endless. It's not bounded to one size or one shape, and it's silent. And and when you sink down into that, the experience is, here's that stability. Here's that boundless okayness that I was looking for in the glass of beer or in the vanquishing, beating up the guy who took my parking spot, or whatever it was. So if we can get full vivid experience of what we truly are, our ocean-like status, or at least even little sample tastes of it, it starts deflating all those seemingly intractable problems.
I love that.
So that's the approach. And another way of looking at it is that the fears, the anxieties, the rages, they seem like big scary monsters looming over us. How am I ever going to get out from under this thing happened in my childhood, and I'm so caught up in this drug or this destructive, self-destructive behavior, whatever it is. But if we look a little more closely, we start to notice that those big scary monsters, they're actually like the balloons in the Macy's Day Parade. What makes them look so big and scary is they've been pumped full of hot air. And that hot air comes from us. We feed them with our concepts about them. So all it takes really, we don't have to wipe those out of the sky. All you need is a little pin or two. You start making little holes in them and they deflate. And in time, they may not ever completely go away, but it's okay. They deflate, and after a while, they're just harmless little flaccid bath toys bouncing around your ankles. Oh, hi there, old buddy. How you doing? How you doing? Like I mentioned in the book, the Dalai Lama is not
Mm.
fearless. He's afraid of worms. I've heard him
Yeah.
talk about it, but when he talks about it, he laughs. Oh yeah, there's my fear of worms. Ha ha ha.
It's like this coexistence in a way
Mm.
that the light and dark share space, but in a harmonious
Yeah.
way. You know, and one of the things you mentioned in your
Mm.
book, you were talking about how there's two things people try to do to deal with their anxieties, fears, insert intense emotion here,
Yeah.
and that
Right.
they usually don't work, and that one of them was suppressing it, you know, and just kind of
Mm-hmm.
bypassing it with false positivity, right? Like, I'm just not going to look at it and I'm going to say my positive affirmation and be happy. And then another
Mm-hmm.
one being, you know, stewing too much in it, feeding it the stories like you've
Right.
mentioned that we do, and it creates this giant monster. And so where would you say is
Right.
the fine middle ground?
Right. Yeah. The middle ground, the third way. And the third way really is what the whole book is. There's a number of methods for going up that golden middle path. This is where we get to the simple boots on the ground stuff. And the good news is that you can practice these simple methods, whether or not all that stuff we were just saying about, being vast oceans of beingness. If that sounds like a bunch of malarkey to you, that's fine. If it's true, you'll see it sooner or later. So very simple method. It's chapter 2 of the book. It's 2 pages long. The Oprah website actually picked this up right after the book was published. It's still running there. I'm happy. I've gotten emails from people all over the world actually on this one saying it's so stupid simple, but it really works. And what this consists of, and people watching or listening to this podcast can do this right now, is breathing through your feet. Okay? Now, if I say to you, the soles of your feet, notice what just happened. There's nothing you had to do. Automatically, now you have some attention. You're experiencing the soles of your feet. And you might say, wait, am I actually feeling that? Am I imagining that? I don't know. Doesn't matter. There's some experience of the soles of your feet. Now, the second thing we can point out is you're breathing. Oh, yeah, breathing's already going on. No effort involved in that. So now let's just put those two things together. So now, as you naturally breathe in, just imagine, feel that you're breathing in through the soles of your feet. And as you breathe out, you're breathing out through the soles of your feet. And breathing in through the soles of your feet. And breathing out through the soles of your feet. Breathing in through the soles of your feet. And breathing out through the soles of your feet. Okay. How are you feeling? Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
So simple.
Just what was that? Yeah, stupid simple. That's the way I like things because I'm really lazy. you know. Uh, but the reality is that uh, we're not sitting in caves in India. I've sat in caves in India, and that's very cool. But this is 2018, and we're living the busy life of middle class people in urban America, and people are not going to take most of them months sitting in a cave. That you can do this in 2 or 3 breaths. So you can do this in the thick of things. You're sitting there in traffic. I was coming back from doing another interview in Manhattan a couple of hours ago, and it was raining and the traffic was all backed up. And, we could just sit there and getting angry about it, or there's a number of things you can do. We'll look at a few others in a moment. And one of them is just breathe through your feet. And then you can't be completely caught up in that frustration because there's a part of you that's outside of that breathing through your feet. And then also there's a subtle psychophysiological thing. After this book came out, I got an email from a yoga teacher in Austin, and she said, "Oh, you didn't mention it, but of course, your breathing through the feet technique comes from the work of the famous neurologist Dr. So-and-so, who found the anatomical connection between the arch of the foot and the diaphragm and the." And I said, okay, sure. I meant to do that. I didn't know that, but it doesn't matter. What I know is what works. And this is actually in the grand tradition of of all the teachings. You know, you go back thousands of years to the yogis sitting in the jungles of ancient India, and they did a lot of R&D work, research and development, just finding out what works. One of the things that they discovered is that if you breathe with a slight constriction in the back of your throat so that you sound like Darth Vader, you know, that also cools your jets in a hurry. Now, fast forward a couple of thousand years, physiologists discovered that that back of the throat constriction stimulates the vagus nerve, which is a pair of nerves leading from the base of the brain down to the diaphragm, and that tends to switch off the sympathetic branch of the nervous system, switches on the parasympathetic, which means that all our fight or flight stuff, where your heart pounds and your mouth gets dry and all of that, that all cools out. And the opposite response, what we call the gaze and graze syndrome or the stay in play syndrome, that turns on that sense of, everything's fine right here. They didn't, so the ancient yogis didn't know why it worked or how it worked, but they knew that it worked.
Absolutely.
And that's enough, really.
It's totally enough. I mean, when you have real practical, results in your own life too, especially, it almost doesn't even matter what's going on physically, but that it works. And, I imagine all of us individually choosing to enter this state on a day-to-day basis, not about striving for perfection, but if we could all live from this more mindful state, how do you think this would impact us collectively?
Well, I've seen it. I've seen it in microcosm. For example, in my work in prison, I've worked in a few prisons. The most of my prison work has been in a place I was just there a few nights ago, Northern State Prison in Newark, New Jersey. If you've ever flown in or out of the Newark airport, it's right almost virtually next door to the airport, just to kind of tease the prisoners, I guess. And there's also an interstate highway running in the front of it and a railroad track behind it. It's like, okay, if you do get over the wall, you have a wonderful choice of transportation. I actually tell in the book, I tell a couple of stories of my experiences with the guys there, and I love working with those guys. I learned so much from them because prison is kind of like everywhere else. Prison is kind of like life, only more so. Everything's intensified. We out here in the so-called free world, we have fears, we have anxieties, we have there everything is cranked up. But the one thing that seems like an advantage in our lives, but in a way is a disadvantage, is that we have enough choices that we can continue to persuade ourselves that we can find okayness, find happiness, make everything all right by changing our outer situation. Okay, if I just get the new car, everything will be okay. When I just finally finish doing my taxes this year, when I just finally, this, and the guys that I work with in prison, they're not under any such illusion because they know that their outer situation is going to suck no matter what. They have no control over it. So the Buddha said, do your practice like your hair's on fire. And that's what I love about working with these guys. Their hair is on fire. They get the importance of this stuff. It's not just, oh, how nice. Maybe I'll take the macrame class this week and I'll take the meditation class. No, this stuff's life and death. I've had guys who describe themselves as drug gang assassins from the streets of Newark, who, after working with me for a month, would come up to me quietly and say, okay, I got one question. How can I purify murder? I had one guy who was like that. Came in just totally, the first time he came in, he was like this, just hooded eyes, that kind of reptilian, look. And but he did the meditation and he softened up a little bit. Came back the next week, softened up a little more, softened up a little more. A few years later, I moved from New Jersey to California, so I couldn't be there every week to run the group anymore. I still go back several times a year, and the group still runs without me. And so the prison system did not see fit to find a replacement for me. So this guy, this prisoner, who had now just become transformed into this lovely, sweet guy,
Wow.
he took over
That's
leading
incredible.
the group. Later, I had him, and I have a whole chapter about this in the book. It's called Testimony, where I asked him, "Would you share your life story with me? I'd like to share this with others." And he sent me a series of letters when I moved back to California, starting with when he was 7 years old, happy kid playing on the streets of Newark. One day, he's standing on the corner. The local drug dealer is handing him $1 so he can run and buy candy. And as the drug dealer is handing him the $1, is the drive-by shooting. He gets whacked, and the little 7-year-old gets blood all over him. And from there, things only can go down. And you can't believe his life story. Like, then the cousin who he went to live with, who would take him out back shooting targets and then shooting dogs, and then started pressuring to shoot people, and just awful, awful, awful. And it's as if week by week, as he did the meditation, all that armor that he had when he first walked in, you could see it melting. It was as if he was recovering the innocence, the purity of that 7-year-old before he witnessed that first shooting. And one day, and his hair was in long cornrows. And one day I was in California, I got a piece of mail from him, but it wasn't like the other letters. This one was a package. It was kind of lumpy. And I opened it up, and it was his hair with the note, "Please donate my hair to Locks of Love." Wow. For some kid who's lost their hair to chemotherapy.
Yeah, I got full body chills right now. That's incredible. I really appreciate you sharing that story.
What's beautiful about that is that you essentially provided this opportunity for them to reclaim their own dignity in an environment that is so oppressive, that seemingly takes that dignity away from them every single day. And there's actually, we're about to have another guest on the podcast, Paul Selig, who wrote a bunch of books, channeled texts, the most recent one, the Book of Freedom. And in it stuck out to me as you're speaking. One of the phrases was, "A man without his dignity cannot be rehabilitated." And so that's mindfulness. That's the reclamation. That's the ownership that we can take to transform our lives, no matter our situation. And that's just proof of that.
Yes, I would say, dignity and love. When I first was going to, just before I started going into that prison, working there in 2005, and I was kind of concerned, gee, what am I going to teach these guys, and will they take to this kind of is just non-dual meditation the way I've learned it from my teachers? Is going to be too steep from that for them? Are they going to be able to respond to this teaching and that teaching? And what I quickly found out was to relax about all of that none of that really mattered, that the main thing, the real teaching, was that every Thursday I showed up, that I was there for them and I wasn't there to judge them, and that without having to say the words, that I loved them. And I really did, and I really do. You can't fake that. But you see those hearts in them. You see the heart. You see the core that's been buried under all that armor and all that horror that they've grown up with. You see that the light of that starting to pierce through all that crap that's been layered on top of it, and you can't help falling in love.
Well,
There would be times when it would, it's New Jersey. There'd be times when there'd be the blizzard, but I'd go, Thursday night, I'd get in my car, I'd drive through the blizzard, and then I'd get there, and as often as not, they'd say, geez, the roof of the chapel is leaking, so we had to cancel your session. And I kind of go,
Yeah,
doesn't
absolutely.
matter. I showed
And
up.
so you've really highlighted and done a wonderful job at talking about the benefits of this type of practice and what it does for people, especially in the most radical cases and hardcore cases, going to prisons and all of that. But so stepping back, what do you see as the most common stumbling blocks people
Mhm.
run into when getting into or developing a practice such as this?
Mhm. Right. The most common stumbling block is that people try to meditate. People, and it's not their fault. For two reasons. A, it makes perfect sense because virtually everything else that we do that benefits our life, the more effort you put into it, the better result you get. You want to learn to play the violin, it's all practice, practice, practice. It's sweat equity. Almost everything is like that. So it's not going to be obvious to you right away that this is the one thing that's exactly the opposite. Um, but in fact, that's the way it is because any effort to create a non agitated state of mind is itself a form of agitation, right? I'm going to say that again. Any effort to create a non agitated state of mind is itself a form of agitation. I love saying that. It took me years to hammer that out. It's to me, this is like the E equals MC squared of meditation, right? And because I mean, if we go back to the analogy of the ocean, we could think the mind is like the surface of the ocean, all these waves, all this activity, this thought and this perception and this emotion. And people know, oh, well, I want silence, I want tranquility. So therefore, I've got to flatten out all those waves. Let me take a hammer or maybe this book will be useful. Bam, 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 bam. We try to flatten out all the waves. Now, that doesn't work. It's like playing whack-a-mole. You hit one, two more pop up over here. And in fact, you're just stirring up the water worse. You're getting yourself agitated. So that's the bad news. The good news is that was a completely misguided activity. All you need to do is allow yourself to sink a little bit. You get about a foot below the surface and you realize, oh, it's already silent down here. It's always already silent beneath the surface. The mistake was trying to silence the thinking level of the mind. The thinking level of the mind, that's supposed to be thinking. Thought, just as there have to be the colors of this room, there have to be the sounds of the voices and the traffic from outside and whatever. That's supposed to be there. In Buddhist psychology, they consider that there are six senses: hearing, thinking, tasting, touching, smelling, and thinking. Thoughts are considered to be just one more kind of, they're a subtle sense object. They're a sense object. There's nothing special about them. They're just like colors or sounds. They're just something there, and one more thing there in the wallpaper, one more thing there in the landscape. So you just leave the thoughts alone. You don't try to do anything about them. And the mind, fortunately, has a natural gravitation toward happiness, toward peace. That's why, we were alluding to this before. In every moment, that's what we're looking for. When we go, oh, I want water, I want peanut butter, I want to go see that new movie, I want to get a good massage, I want to have some sex, I want to have whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with any of those things, except that none of them solve the basic problem of human life, which is that those are all finite sources of satisfaction, and our appetite for satisfaction is infinite. That's the blessing and the curse of being born as a human being rather than a cat or a Brussels sprout or something, is that there is something in us that says, yeah, but what else is there? We have that instinct, that intuition. There's something more. There's something more, and we're not satisfied till we find it. And we may, and you can really see all of human behavior
Mm.
through that lens. It makes human behavior make a lot of sense. Why people wind up knocking their heads against all kinds of walls, because they're trying to break their heads open, in a sense. They're trying to have that experience that I stumbled into when I was 11, 12 years old. And that through meditation practice, I've found that I'm able to, more and more just grow into being there all the time, and that other people can do that. So, um, the because our mind is looking for that all the time in natural meditation, what I call natural meditation, and which I haven't made any of this stuff up. It's all learned from my teachers who represent long traditions going back to India and going back to Tibet, Vajrayana Buddhism, Dzogchen practice, the Advaita thread of teachings from India. And so I call it natural meditation. I put it in plain American English. And the main principle is that if you just get the mind turned in that direction, gravity takes over. And there's no doing. There's no doing. It settles by itself. And it takes a little getting used to, because you go, oh, well, maybe if I just try to push away these thoughts here, and then you wind up stirring the water again, and after a while you get the idea. Okay, I give up. I surrender. Let Mother Nature take over. She's a better driver than I.
Yep.
Surrender,
Yeah.
surrender,
Right.
surrender. And you've shared a lot of
Yeah.
shared some practical
Yeah.
tips.
Oh, let me say one thing, because another way to say surrender is give up. And people think of, oh, they said give up. That sounds so terrible, so hopeless. But think about it for a moment. Giving is a good thing. Up is a good direction. Give.
That's a much more peaceful way of
What could
looking
be
into
lovelier?
the feelings that we usually have when we do hear the words give up. And you're full of practical tips already, and your book is just jam-packed with really creative practices, and not in a sense that is forcing someone to do something, but like you said, guiding people on how to give up, because sometimes it takes a lot to really unlearn what has taught us, to be so crammed and so imprisoned by our own stories, right? And so, which is one reason why I really like this book of yours.
Right.
But what are a few simple, I guess, tips?
Yeah, good. Yeah. So let's do more of the quick, easy, practical tips. So the one we already did, breathing through your feet. Here's one that I just love. This is one of my favorite practices these days, which is drop your thoughts. 3, 4, 5. Okay, done. Okay. You slap your hands in front of your face to just kind of shock yourself, and then just for 5 seconds drop your thoughts. After 6 seconds, you pick them up again. Now, the reason that this is so effective is, just as you were saying, we tend to get so caught up in these stories. We invest a lifetime in building up all these stories. Then this thing happened, and I got this struggle with my parents, and my mom said that, and my dad did that, and blah, 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 blah. I know people who they're starting to tell you, they're going on and on with the story of them and their parents. And I go, wait, how old are you? Well, I'm 50. Your parents are still alive? Oh, no, they died 10 years ago. And you're still fighting with them? So where's that fight taking place? Right? It's all just thoughts. It's all just thoughts. Reach out your finger right now and touch the past. You can't do that. It's just thoughts. So but the thing is, when the thoughts come along, one of the things that's built into the thoughts is the thought, this is here all the time. And it's not. It's not. Okay. For example, let's take something that you don't necessarily think of as problematic. Let's take your politics. I am a Democrat. I am a Republican. Or I am a Christian. I am a Buddhist. I am an atheist, whatever. These things that perhaps we think of as inherent in our identity. This is who I am. When you are fast asleep at night in the state of deep dreamless sleep, what's your religion? Right? Yeah, exactly. Flatline. There ain't none. You can't have a religion then because you're not thinking. You can't, that whole system of whatever your religious doctrine is, and whether you've got, this one, whether your religion is Islam, then the structure looks like this. And if your religion is Hindu, the structure might look very different. But the Legos that both structures are made out of are the same kind of Legos, which are called thoughts. And when you're fast asleep, no Legos, no thoughts, no religion, no politics, no personal history, your long, sad story about your childhood or your happy story about your childhood, all your story about the alleged future that you think is just around the corner, gone. Nothing, no existence. Okay, it's all dropped then. The problem is we're conked out. So we don't get to experience that freedom, that open space that's free from all those stories. Okay. Then we wake up and, oh, here it is again. Now I'm going to have it for the next 16 hours. But the reality is you don't have it for the next 16 hours because what's your religion when you're parallel parking in a tight space? It's the same deal. You don't have the bandwidth available to deal with Christian theology or atheist doctrine or whatever it is. You're nothing then. Blissfully nothing. But again, so what we do in meditation essentially is settling down into that same place of silence that you do when you're asleep, except you're not asleep. It's what the scientists call a wakeful hypometabolic state, meaning hypometabolic, settled down, silent as in sleep, but wakeful to directly experience and enjoy that. Now, yes, open. And so the fact of the matter is we drop our thoughts 1,000 times a day, but we pick them up 1,001 times a day and convince ourselves that it's there all the time because we haven't been conscious of it. So one thing is just noticing the process that I've just described, starting to notice, oh yeah, the stuff's being dropped all the time. I drop it, I pick it up. I drop it, I pick it up. There's that lever, as we were saying before. Oh, maybe I could choose to not pick it up. And then another thing is to just poke holes in it by every once in a while. Okay, just drop them. Drop them for 5 seconds. To say, oh, drop it forever, drop all that BS, it's too hard, too challenging. If you just drop it for 5 seconds, every time you do that, it weakens their grip on us. And actually, even that's not quite accurately. A thought doesn't have a power to grip us. We're gripping the thought. And so all you have to do really is let it go. One of my teachers, Sri Muji, wonderful Advaita teacher from Jamaica that I've spent time with, once I heard someone ask him, but Muji, how do you drop it? And he said, you know how to do it. How do you drop a hot potato?
Muji's wonderful.
His humor, too, is really refreshing.
Yeah. So we have breathe through your feet. We have drop your thoughts. Here's another one. I'm going to teach you my 2 favorite mantras. Okay. And we all know that mantra is powerful. Mantras are not some weird, mysterious thing. They're psychoacoustically optimal sounds, right? They're sounds whose vibrational effect, as road tested over the centuries by the yogis in the jungles of India and Tibet and other places, they found that, these particular sound vibrations are really optimal for recognizing that clarity, that openness. Okay. So my favorite mantra is, That's the natural mantra. It turns out that for years I practiced Vajrayana Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. And in Tibetan Buddhism, that happens to be the central mantra. That's the mantra that's used the most in meditative practice. That's the sound that we spontaneously make when everything's okay. I finally finished doing my taxes. I finally got the piece of stringy celery out from that back tooth. I finally achieved the orgasm. I thought, whatever it is. I finally made the last mortgage payment on my house. Now everything's okay. So when we have that feeling inside, spontaneously, we tend to make that sound. But mind body's always a two-way street. So we can do it the other way, make that sound, and it tends to bring out that feeling. Now, another one that works the same way, this is one I learned from a dear friend of mine. I was coming back from some years ago from a meditation retreat in Texas. And I'd been going through some emotional turmoil, some women problems, actually. And my friend said, we were on the plane leaving Texas, and she said, Dean, just remember this. No matter what's going on, you can never have a bad time as long as you say, wee! So in all my workshops, I always have people do that. And, and along with the mantra of we, of course, there's the mudra of throwing up your hands. And I was just doing this with this group in Pennsylvania last night when, as far as we knew, there was an active shooter, down the block and a bomb scare and all that. We're sitting there throwing up our hands going, wee! And you do that a couple of times, and it's really hard to be depressed or worried. And that's due to something called the facial feedback hypothesis, which was first explored by Charles Darwin, later refined by other scientists. Your inner feeling tends to be reflected in your outer facial expression, but also, again, it's a two-way street. You can't say "wee" without smiling, and then it's really hard to be depressed. There's a piece of research that I cite in the book that I really love. Looking for a pen here. Okay, we'll just pretend I have a pen. They had people watch a cartoon, and everyone was handed a ballpoint pen before they sat down to watch the cartoon. And 1/3 of them was told, just hold the pen in your hand. That was the control group. They didn't know this. The second group was told, hold the pen while you're watching the cartoon, hold the pen between your lips. And the third group was told, hold the pen between your teeth. Now, of course, when you hold the pen between your lips, it tends to make you frown. When you hold it between your teeth, it makes you smile. After they watched the cartoon, they had everyone rate the cartoon 1 to 10. How funny was it? Mm-hmm. And the people holding the pen between their teeth all thought the cartoon was funnier. Okay. So moral of the story, we think it's the outside world. This is the Buddha's teaching in a nutshell, by the way. We think it's the outside world that's, the stuff outside us, the world, the cartoon, that's funny or sad or this or that. But that's not the whole story. It's how we're processing it. It's the consciousness that we're bringing to it. And one way to just brighten up the consciousness is smile, laugh, say, wee. I got an email a few months ago from a couple who had attended one of, and the woman said in the email, I just wanted to let you know, my husband and I were in this workshop you gave in such and such a city last year. And yesterday, we were driving home from the auto dealership in our new Lexus. We were driving down the interstate, and a state trooper's car T-boned us, knocked our car into the gully, rolled over a couple of times. When it finally stopped rolling, the dust settled. We looked at ourselves, we looked at each other, we saw that we were both okay, and without missing a beat, spontaneously, we both said, whee!
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And that's proof that it's an everlasting thing that sticks with you. Once this concept really settles in our being, you're resilient. You can handle anything in your external reality because, like you said, it's what's inside. And
more and more that becomes the case. Some of this, some of it, if you just see it clearly once, you can never unsee it. Like I give the example, this is from the classical literature. Well, the way I tell the story, I soup it up a little bit, which is one day a guy comes home and there's a tiger in his living room. Naturally, he gets very upset. His blood pressure spikes. He's having anxiety symptoms. Maybe he runs to the medicine cabinet to find some anti-anxiety medicine. Maybe he sits down to meditate. Maybe he starts, he consults Siri to find, tiger exterminators near me, something like that. And then his wife comes home and says, "Hi, honey, how do you like my new paper tiger I just picked up at the art gallery? Isn't it lifelike?" Okay. Now, what happens next is most interesting. He doesn't have to do anything else. He's just once seen through the illusory nature of what seemed to him like the problematic nature of the world. It seemed like it had a problematic nature. That turns out to be illusory, turns out to be okay. Now, he doesn't have to take medication. His blood pressure naturally settles down. He doesn't have, his anxiety goes away. He doesn't have to keep being told that. Meditation, it has the physiological aspect of settling the body down and getting acclimated to that style of functioning. It's good to do it every day. But now this is something else. This is what's called view or insight. And if we get it clearly, we only have to do it once. Once you see that it's a paper tiger, and what the great enlightened sages say is that life is a paper tiger.
Mm-hmm. Very beautifully put.
Right?
Yes,
And you
yes,
see through that once and you go, okay,
and,
you don't have to show me
wonderful
again.
practical knowledge that I think a lot of people can benefit from and use. I know we've approached this subject with other people before, but you really put it in a way that makes it simple and approachable and digestible, and we just really appreciate all of that a lot. And so, what updates do you have? I know you're promoting your new book. What other things do you have? Do you host retreats? Any workshops people can come to? Anything like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if people go to my website, they can go to deansluyter.com, which is hard to spell, or they can go to deanwords.com. We'll also get you there. That's easier to spell, deanwords.com. And my teaching schedule is on there. We've got a number of new things coming up for 2019 that are going to be on there. They're not on there yet, but one that's on there in June. It's June 3rd through 7th of 2019. I'm going to be leading a 5-day retreat at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York, next to Woodstock. Oh, it's so gorgeous. And on the grounds of the Omega Institute, the gorgeous lake and the trees. And there are all these other programs going on, and you got it set up so there's certain times in the afternoon or evening where you can go sample the other programs, and just a wonderful slate of teachers. So that's this coming June at Omega. And I'm also doing these days more and more corporate work. People invite me to into corporate settings, wellness settings, something called the Young Presidents Organization a couple of years ago. These are all people who are head of companies that are at least $50 million or more companies. They brought me down to the rainforest in Guatemala, first to teach all their wives to meditate, and then I taught the executives to meditate. So I love, for me, part of the balanced diet is working with the heavy hitter CEOs, and then working with the guys who are locked up in maximum security, and I teach pretty much the same to everyone, because human beings are pretty much the same. Also, I should mention that for people who live in the Los Angeles area, my wife and I host an open meditation usually it's every other Tuesday evening in Santa Monica, and people can connect with that through my website. And also, I've started live streaming those sessions on YouTube, so people can find them there, or I'm starting to archive them so you can look at the past sessions. Also on my website, I've got guided meditation audio tracks. So this approach to meditation, natural meditation that I talked about, where you're not trying to push away thoughts, you're not trying to concentrate, you're not trying to create some mindful situation or some meditative situation, but just allowing gravity to take over, to pull you into that silent ocean of being underneath all these waves of thinking. That does take a little bit of guidance. At least certainly the first few times. So if people go to my website, and it's completely free, you can stream these guided meditation audio tracks and just have Uncle Dean walk you through it. It's useful to have someone else in the driver's seat, so you can really kick back. Okay, I'm just in the passenger seat. there's nothing for me to do.
Got to get this book. You will have a blast reading it. And I fully believe that you have the power to change your life for the better. And this book can be one of those tools to help you do so. So, Dean, thank you so
Thank you.
much for coming on to the show.